Here, we have Professor Alison Daly from the University of Lausanne, who is also a PI of Adam Lab, where I did my first postdoc actually. So Alison, very welcome. Then we have Dr. Liz Martin-Silverstone from the University of Bristol. Liz is a lab manager of the paleobiology research group there. We have Dr. Richie Howard from NHM London, where Richie works as a curator of arthropods, is it? Or is it non-insects?
Fossil arthropods.
Fossil arthropods. Okay, perfect. So fossil arthropods. And then we have Dr. Xiao Letta, Vasco Letta. I'm so sorry if I've said that wrong, Xiao. Please interrupt me now. And he is a senior editor with scientific reports at the Nature portfolio. So thank you all so much for coming to this. We really appreciate you being here. I've had a couple of people already tell me how excited they are for this event today. Perfect timing by Nydia as well, our diversity officer who's just joining us now. Nydia is at the University of Manchester. Nydia is also postdocing there on a Marie Curie Fellowship and is our diversity officer for PALAS, and she'll be the co-host today. So with that, I will invite the four panelists, whoever wants to go first. I'm looking at Richie, if you want to go first and maybe share your screen. And you have 10 minutes to tell us about your career so far.
Yeah, okay, sure. I think my little window is first on the list, so I'll go for it. So I'll share my screen. Can everyone see that all right?
Yeah.
Okay, full screen, there we go.
Perfect.
All right, so hi everyone. It's lovely to be invited here. It's nice to chat about things like this. And so thanks for inviting me, Ola. So as Ola said, my institution is the Natural History Museum in London. And I've been the curator of fossil arthropods and also graptolites since 2022. So the graptolite collection, weirdly, is in the arthropod collection because of historic associations between biostratigraphers that studied both trilobites and graptolites, and there being very few graptolite specialists. But arthropods is what I'm qualified in and interested in. So I'll talk about my sort of academic background and all that kind of stuff in a moment, but I thought it might first be useful to just talk about what being a curator actually is, because I think it's one of those jobs that not only is it hugely variable across different museums, I think it's also the sort of job where it just seems like a sort of quite a vague job, is it? You know, arranging things and organizing things, and it does involve that. So that's the sort of the physical and digital side of actually curating specimens. But that's really not the sort of main focus of my work as a curator. And because at a big museum like the Natural History Museum, we have all kinds of different teams of people that have their own specialisms outside of the specific academic disciplines. So, for example, all that physical and digital side of the curation of the specimens, we have a whole team of people who are the digitization team that work on, you know, making computer records and image records of natural history items. We have a loans team that organize, you know, documentation of loans and legal framework for all that kind of stuff. We have a conservation team who handle the preparation and conservation of specimens. So these are all things that I do on a daily basis, but it's more coordinating with other teams of people. My sort of, what I feel is my main role as a curator is essentially being the point of access for the particular collection that I curate for its many stakeholders. And so that includes includes researchers, and it includes various different people within the museum itself, such as we have a whole department that handles galleries and exhibitions, so that for when fossil specimens are displayed, and also the public. So the collection, it's public money that looks after the collection. They belong to all of us. It's not just researchers that I have into the collection to collect data. I interact with the public in a variety of ways as well. And so, as well as being that sort of, I think the word I like to use is like the guide to the collection as a curator. I'll talk a bit more about that later. It's also obviously the development of the collection. So we're currently in the process of moving the collection, or at least my collection, not the whole. Sorry, the collection I'm responsible for. We're not supposed to say my collection. is currently in the process of moving it outside of London to a new facility that we're building with the University of Reading. So as well as securing the future of it and moving it, there's also things like collecting new specimens and handling donations of specimens, either from researchers who want to publish on them or just interested members of the public. And also, I'm from a research background. I'll talk about that in a moment. So I have my own personal research interests and needs that I utilize the collection for. And also, yeah, outreach and media. The NHM is a very public-facing place, and so I'm quite often working with people in like television and magazines and radio who are always looking for snippets and specimens for filming and that kind of thing. And then doing stuff like this as well, promoting what I see as the long-term preservation and continued use of the collection, because that's really what's crucial. It's about being able to continue that the collection gets used, and therefore is something that's worth looking after. So my educational background, I'd imagine, is a lot like a lot of other people in this seminar today. So I did an undergraduate degree in geology at the University of Leicester. So that was specifically the geology with paleobiology course, because I was always interested in paleontology. I didn't know I wanted to be a curator, but I knew I wanted to be involved in paleontology from a sort of young age. I then did a master's degree at the University of Bristol. I did paleobiology. And then I went on and got my doctorate. So I did a PhD in biology at the University of Exeter down in Cornwall. And my thesis was the deep evolution of ecdysozoa. So ecdysozoa being the invertebrate superclade that arthropods belong to. So I was interested in the evolution of arthropods from sort of early on in my career. And that was sort of what gave me the tools I needed to be the curator of the fossil arthropod collection at the Natural History Museum, because sort of key to being a curator of a specific collection of something is having a sort of very intricate knowledge of it, that you are able to navigate through that collection, which isn't always, it's sort of like, it's a nice idea that we on our computer system, we have like a list of every specimen in every drawer and where they're all located, but it's really not like that in a museum that's so big and so old. So you need that sort of deep knowledge of something if you're going to curate it. So my PhD, I think, really was what unlocked being. I couldn't have been a curator if I hadn't done my PhD first. That's not the case for everyone. I'll talk about that in the next slide. But for me personally, how my sort of journey to being a fossil curator, key to it was developing that deep knowledge and understanding of the specific thing that I was going to be the curator of. In my case, fossil arthropods. So therefore, the sort of evolution, taxonomy, systematics of that group of organisms. And so when I was doing my PhD, and I guess this is just a bit of general advice, I tried to divide my time among as many different sort of research areas as was feasible, to sort of keep my options open. So I looked at stuff that I was less personally interested in, found very challenging. So things like molecular systematics and divergence time estimation. But the stuff I was more interested in was specimen-based work. I was interested in fossils as objects more than I was as data points. And so I tried to do as much specimen-based work as I could from a collection I had access to during my PhD. And that was also quite critical in me being able to do my job, having that experience managing a small collection of fossils that my supervisor had access to. So yeah, I've been curator at the NHM since 2022. So I had a year in between finishing my PhD and getting the job where I just spent a year basically working outside of paleontology, being rejected for postdoc applications and fellowship proposals and all the sort of thing that I'm sure we'll hear a lot about today. I had no formal training in curation or museum studies prior to hiring, but that's not unusual. So I think I mentioned this a few minutes ago. There's sort of two routes to being a curator, at least within the group of curators that I'm involved in, paleontology curators at a large museum. I look around at my colleagues and there's sort of two different ways that we got here. So some of us are museum specialists who have sort of been involved in museums for a long time. Perhaps they did a degree or master's in museum studies or volunteered in museums for a long time and got a job in some department of the museum, and were able to embed themselves deeply into a specific topic and that sort of qualified them to be so they knew how to be a curator, but they had to embed themselves into a topic that would make them able to curate a collection. They had the skills and they needed the knowledge. Whereas the other way is sort of have the knowledge and need the skills, and that's me and several of my colleagues in my team. So as being a subject specialist, so for me, arthropod evolution, and who then has to learn to be a curator, and that's what I've spent the last 3 years, and I know what I'm still doing. It's all still no 2 days are the same. I'm also always learning new things about how to be an effective point of access to the collection and a guide to it for the people who are interested in it. So I'll just finish up now. I'm sorry, I haven't looked how long I've been speaking for. Hopefully not too long. Okay, great. So I'll just talk now quickly about my sort of career milestones since I became a curator, because they're very different to what I thought they would be. When I was doing my PhD, and I thought, when I finish my PhD, hopefully I'll get a postdoc and then a fellowship, and then I'll be like a lecturer and one day be a professor. And that was sort of the career path I had in mind because I was an academic. But it's actually turned out quite different, and I'm happy. It's been quite different in an enjoyable and fulfilling way. So in 2023, so I became a TV consultant. So I'm still doing that at the moment. And there's a comedy series just called Dinosaur. It's been on BBC 4, I think, and it's about a paleontologist who works in a fictional museum in Glasgow. And I just basically do a Zoom call with them a few times a year, and they ask me about being a paleontologist and how museums work, and that's a really unusual, rewarding thing that I never thought I would do. Then my sort of research and publications have changed massively since I became a curator rather than a full-time researcher. I don't sort of do things looking to be at the cutting edge of science anymore. I do things that are I suppose what people call the stamp collecting side of paleontology, of science, where I'm just describing things and listing things, which is a different mindset, and I personally find really rewarding. So the last 2 publications I've had, so they're pictured on the slide. One is a monograph, so a taxonomic and stratigraphic circumscription of a particular group of fossils, and the other one is an editorial job on British Paleozoic fossils, which is the Naturalist Museum's identification guide. So again, not something I ever thought I would do when I was doing my PhD, but really rewarding. And other things. So outreach is a much bigger part of my career now than it was when I was a postgraduate student. So I'm the co-leader of the NHM's delegation at the Lyme Regis Fossil Festival, which takes up several months of my year every year, the planning and then the execution of it. Again, really public facing and enjoyable. I guess, and then most recently, yes, this one completed first major digitization project. So that's the NHM Amber collection, which is a large historic collection of amber, which I've been working with people who have a completely different sort of skill set to me, but are still involved in paleontology in a museum, and the digitization team. So the brilliant people who work at the museum, who their job is to photograph and scan and or use technology to create digital versions and digital records of the specimens so that they're more accessible and that when people can access them through the museum's website and portal, which I have very little knowledge of how to make those things happen, and it's all sort of new to me. But I likewise are able to answer all their questions about the specimens and resolve the top problems with the labels, with the taxonomy and the stratigraphy and all that kind of thing. So, really different and enjoyable to what I thought I would do when I was a research student. And I think that's all my slides. So I'll leave it there, and I'll look forward to answering any questions that people might have. So I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Richie, thank you so much. That was so interesting. As somebody who works as a postdoc in a museum, it's really nice to hear sort of the operational side of the actual curator work as well. So, and also from a different country, right, where curational work can kind of vary in different museums around the world as well, right? So that's definitely something we can get onto later. If anybody has questions right now that they think specifically for Richie, please put them in the Q&A so we can answer them all at the end. So thank you so much again. I'm looking here. Alison, would you like to share your screen next and go? That would be great.
Yep, sure, no problem. Okay. So are you seeing my screen? Yeah, good. Okay. So good evening, everyone. Thanks to everyone for being here, and thanks for inviting me to share my career path and experiences along the way. I decided I was sort of debating how to present it, but basically I thought I'd just sort of present a narrative of where I started and how I ended up where I am today, which is at the University of Lausanne in Switzerland, where I'm the Associate Professor of Paleontology and also the Director of the Institute of Earth Sciences, at least for a few years. So I will jump right in. I'm Canadian by background. I was born in Canada, and this is where I did the early part of my studies, and also where I first got really interested in geology and paleontology. So here's a little bit of an overview. I did my bachelor's at Queen's University, and then I did my master's in earth sciences in paleontology at the University of Western Ontario, which is now just called Western. But for me, it all sort of, my path that led to paleontology and geology actually started with a road trip after high school. When I was in high school, I really wanted to be a dentist or some sort of biologist, so very sort of different path. And then me and my best friend, we went on a road trip out to Alberta and BC, and we were driving in this place you can see on the screen here in Alberta called Drumheller. And I was really struck by the landscape of this place with all these like stripy rocks and these weird erosive structures called hoodoos. And of course, the incredible museum, the Royal Tyrrell Museum, which had loads of fossils on display. So I was really like, what the heck is going on with these rocks? And I wanted to learn more. So I took geology as an elective, sort of like a at least at Queen's, my major at that time was biology, but you could opt to take an extra course, and I took geological sciences. Um, and it was just a really, really inspiring course that I just sort of like saw all these wonderful connections between like the biological world, the geological world, the oceans, the atmosphere, and it really sort of filled me with a wonder for earth sciences. So I switched my major to be a double major in geological sciences and biology. And the perfect mix of that in the end was paleontology for me. So I eventually graduated in 2023. This is the Earth Sciences building at Queen's, where I spent many, many hours studying. And maybe you're wondering what fieldwork can be like in Canada, where we do have fairly long winters. Well, some of our field camps did take place in the winter with snow. You can see me and one of my classmates there trying to desperately find the only outcrop we could in the middle of winter, in the middle of snow, which was basically under like the roots of a tree. But it wasn't always like that. Sometimes we had nice weather as well in the fall and the spring. So sorry if these photos are a bit blurry. This was from the era when we like took photos with on film, like physical photos, not with our phones. So I had to scan them. I took an approach during my bachelor's to just try a lot of things and learn a lot of topics. So I did a summer internship in geochemistry. I did a bachelor's thesis in stable isotopes and diatoms. And then a really important experience I had during my bachelor's was when I was a fieldwork assistant in sedimentology and paleontology in the Avalon Peninsula. So I got to go to Newfoundland in the summer of 2022 with Guy Narbonne and his team and see the amazing Ediacara and biota fossils that are out there on the east coast of Canada. And that for me really sealed the deal in my head that I wanted to do paleontology. It was this ancient world where there were so many questions and such a wonderful ancient life that was really inspiring to me. So there I sort of put my like heart eyes emoji. It's like, oh wow, paleontology is really for me. So I applied to multiple different master's programs. I didn't get into all of them, but then eventually I got into a master's in earth sciences and paleontology at the Western University, where I worked with Alf Lenz and Jisuo Jin on trace fossils and brachiopods. So very different from the Ediacara and biota that I was inspired by, very different from the diatoms I did in my master's thesis, but still linked to ecology and sort of the interactions of organisms in ancient times. And so I'm going to sort of start summarizing with this slide, like what I've learned along the way, just bits and pieces of advice that I build up as I go over my career. So what I did there was I tried a lot of stuff. I tried a lot of different subjects and eventually found through trial and error what interested me, what worked with my learning style, and so on and so forth. And remember that whatever you start, I started in diatoms and then did trace fossils and brachiopods. Now I work in arthropods. It doesn't lock you in for your career for forever what you choose for a bachelor's project or a master's project, or even your PhD topic. You can always keep moving and keep diversifying your interests. So then after my master's, which in Canada, it's typically a 2-year program, I then applied for various PhDs and was accepted at Uppsala University, where I worked with Graham Budd, and I was co-supervised by Jean-Bernard Caron at the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto. And I had the wonderful fortune to be able to work on radiodonts, these stem lineage arthropods from places like the Burgess Shale, Sirius Passet, fascinating Cambrian animals that were fairly large and predatory. And there was a lot of descriptive work and taxonomy to be done, and also figuring out their ecology. And I had a really wonderful 4 years working on these fantastic fossils, spending my time between Sweden and Canada, working in the collections at the Royal Ontario Museum. And what I learned during this time is that you're not your supervisor when you're doing a PhD or a master's, you're your own researcher. You can build your own network of collaborators, try not to burn bridges along the way, but there were, lots of opportunities to start reaching out and building up a network of people some of whom I still work with today. And you don't only have to work with your supervisor, you can reach out and build links with other people. So in 2010, I got my PhD from Uppsala University. And then I had about 6 years where I was doing a postdoc. I wasn't employed for all of that. The first 6 months, I didn't actually have a postdoc. I did multiple applications during this period. I counted up, I did at least 32 different applications to postdocs or permanent and tenure track positions, as well as many grants. So ERC starting grant applications, NERC grants, etc. So this was a period of exploring research topics, coming up with new ideas for research topics, and also a lot of applications. And of course, uncertainty. And there, I mean, it's sometimes really challenging, right? You make all these applications, maybe they're not successful, maybe you get rejected for jobs you thought you might be perfect for, but the key thing is to try to take something positive, even from unsuccessful applications. Maybe you had the chance to talk to somebody new, or you explored a new topic, or you learned about a new lab somewhere. Try to take the positive from unsuccessful applications. And for me, what worked was applying for a lot of different positions. Even if you don't have every single listed requirement or experience that they ask for, maybe you have 5 out of 8 that they're asking for, you have 80% of what they're asking for, still apply, because in the end, no perfect candidate really exists for any job who ticks every single box. So apply for lots of things was what worked for me. Eventually, I got some funding from the Swedish Research Council for a postdoc, where I spent 2 wonderful years at the NHM in London with Greg Edgecombe. I learned at this time, the project was continuing radiodonts, looking at Anomalocaris, various wonderful Cambrian beasts. At that time, I learned a lot about different supervision styles. I interacted with a lot of senior researchers who had wildly different approaches to supervision. At the time, I was also becoming more aware of EDI topics, and I continued to broaden my collaborative network in this postdoc. And then the next step in my career was a really happy day where I had been making, as I said, many, many applications. I was offered a fellowship to the Oxford University Museum of Natural History, as well as a lectureship, like fixed-term lectureship in the Department of Zoology at Oxford University at the same time. And so here I learned the value of negotiation. Basically, I sort of had these 2 offers, and I asked if they could somehow be combined. And eventually it worked out really, really well. So I spent 3 years at Oxford, mixing my time between a research fellowship at the Museum of Natural History and then developing teaching skills and supervision skills of my own, rather than being the supervised student, I was starting to supervise my own bachelor's and master's and even PhD students in my group. So it was a really nice mix where I could start to balance out my CV with a little bit more teaching and supervision. And as well, outreach. The Museum of Natural History had lots of opportunities for developing outreach. And so learning how to like talk to multiple sort of stakeholders, multiple different groups of people interested in fossils for different reasons, be it research or teaching or the public. And for me, anyway, this helped sort of build up my self-confidence that I eventually, the next step led me on to the permanent job that I have now. So I've added another point here to what I've learned along the way. When you get a job offer, that's your point where you can negotiate. And it's okay to ask for what you want. If you have the offer and there's something you're not sure about, you can ask questions, you can negotiate. That's the moment when you can do that. So then moving swiftly forward in 2016 is when I started here at the University of Lausanne. I applied to an advertised position for professor in paleontology, and I interviewed and happily got the job offer. Indeed, I also negotiated at that time for certain, like the level of the position. So I was hired as associate prof, not assistant prof, which means I already had tenure at the time that I started. And then with the security of knowing that my own job was stabilized, I could reach out with some new research ideas. So here's some photos from various collaborations when I was first starting at the University of Lausanne. And happily, I got funding from the Swiss National Science Foundation for a project on the Fezoata biota. So moving slightly younger in time to the early Ordovician and studying all sorts of different arthropods, as well as the taphonomy of this site. And you can see our host Orla in the photo here in the bottom right of the screen from when we were all working together in Lausanne. My job at Lausanne University taught me a lot of things, and I try to still take advantage of training opportunities. For example, you're suddenly, all of your career is thinking about research, and then suddenly you find yourself in a role of leadership. And actually, we don't get formal training in leadership and project management and budget management and all of these skills that one suddenly needs. So I've taken advantage of opportunities when they present themselves. I participated in the HIT program, the High Potential University Leaders Training Program. This was basically a program aimed at training women professors in Switzerland for management and team leadership skills. And the other thing I had to work really hard on, because it doesn't come naturally to me, is developing a good life-work balance. So not letting work become all-consuming and take up every evening and weekend. You probably saw my kiddo running around behind me. So shortly after arriving in Lausanne, I had my first child. And yeah, it's really a moment to think, okay, I have the ability to adapt my research to my life. So you can see an image of the aquarium lab that I developed when I first got to Lausanne, because taphonomy experiments meant I wasn't in the field as often for that part of my career where my child was young. So I tried to develop lines of research that also fit with my personal life. I didn't want to be traveling as much, being away in the field for such a long time. So it became a little bit more about experimental work. And then, I always keep an open mind to making new collaborations. So I was able to build up a collaboration with biologists based here in Lausanne. This is another SNF-funded project that we have focused on arthropod molting from transcriptomics, genomics, phylogenetics, evo-devo, and paleontology. It's a really nice collaborative effort. But it wasn't all successes. There have been things that were harder as well. I have still unfinished projects. The photo on the screen is Myoscolex, these wonderful fossils I studied well over 10 years ago, still haven't published because all the other things in life, getting your teaching ready, administration, it sort of took over. So I have less time for research now than I have ever had in my career. And 3 years ago, I took on the role of director of the Institute of Earth Sciences. That's a large management administrative role, and I basically don't have time for my own research. Some other points I could have improved on, like my first hires weren't as diverse. I wasn't as aware of EDI issues, so I tried to stay informed and be really active, and aim for a more inclusive, diverse team here at UNIL, in my own group, but also working for this largely within Lausanne and within Switzerland. And then I definitely had a problem that I didn't know how to say no. So when I first got to Lausanne, I was on too many committees, too many responsibilities. And that sometimes means you have to cut out aspects of research or your personal life, hopefully, hopefully not. So it's all about finding the balance and starting to say no when you need to. So here's sort of a summary. I think I added the last few points there. Adapting your research and your interests to your life situation, making sure you can do the work, that you can live up to what you have committed to doing and that you can do it well. And if that means sometimes you have to say no because you know you don't have the time, that's okay. You need to prioritize. We can't work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So sometimes we have to make choices. And then the last point is about choices. Choose the people you want to work with when you're in research. That's a benefit. You can choose a little bit your collaborators. You can choose the research topics that interest you. So take advantage of that choice where you have it, and then find the balance with the aspects of your job where you are sort of more locked in, like teaching, for example. Those hours are fixed, the courses are fixed. I bring my research and experience to that teaching. And it's all about finding that balance. So I'll stop sharing now, but then just to wrap up, as a professor, you end up doing a lot of different roles: management, leadership, administration. A lot of it is not the research that we learn to do during our master's and PhD. And that's okay as long as you keep, learning how to do it. It's sort of a lifelong learning and trying to adapt to those changes in the career. And I took on the role of director because I thought, oh, hey, maybe management, like upper management, university administration might be a way I wanted to go. Honestly, don't tell my colleagues in Lausanne. But it's not necessarily the career goal for me anymore. I look forward to wrapping up my 4 years and going back to research. And I think that's okay too. You try something and then you say, you know what? I learned a lot from this, but it's actually not the career I want for me. So I'm gonna go back to more research and less sort of management in the future. So that's sort of enough for me blabbering about myself. I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody might have in this webinar, or always feel free, you can email me after as well if we don't have time to get around to it. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Alison. That's always so refreshing to hear from sort of an associate professor and a PI and a leader in a sort of a research group, someone talking about their failures and, looking at trial and error, as you said, always that never stops. There's always a lot of trial and error and failures, but no matter what, we can spin it and learn something from it. So I've got so many things written down so far between Richie and Alison, so I don't even think we're going to get to all the questions that I have, but I will pass the baton now on to How, if you would like to share your screen. And again, if anyone has a Q&A for Alison and you think of something now, please put it there so you don't forget your question.
Sure. Let me just see if this works. Okay, everyone can see the screen. It's all excellent. Yeah, thank you for organizing. Thank you for having me. I feel like I'm cheating a bit because I'm the only one here a bit outside of active working on paleontology, but I still can dab in it, but from a different perspective. So yeah, my name is João. I'm a senior editor for Scientific Reports. For those who don't know, Scientific Reports is a fully open access journal. We publish pretty much anything in STEM sciences, life sciences, physical sciences, more recently even expanding to engineering and psychology. So fairly broad scope. And the way Scientific Reports works as a journal is most of the papers are actually handled by academic editors, but then you also have an in-house editorial team that I'm part of to kind of oversee the whole process and step in and help out, assist when needed. And I'll go into more details about kind of like specific tasks and what's the day-to-day of an editor for scientific reports and an editor more broadly speaking. But I'll also just do a quick overview of my career so far. So yeah, my interest in paleontology started very young, like many of us here. I'm from Portugal, and I pretty much first half of my career was done there. I actually ended up going for a more broader biology undergraduate. So, and when I say broad, I learned everything from molecular cell biology, toxicology, ecology, genetics, evolution, plants, animals. I did like one class in paleontology, which was part of like the geology degree in the same faculty. So that was a very broad background. I then did a master's at CBU, so that's the research center that's part of the University of Porto in Portugal. And my master's was actually on evolution and population genetics of North African foxes. I joined a group, and my supervisor was one of those people that prefers to be isolated in the middle of the desert, and the less phone signal he has, the happier he is. So that was kind of his vibe. So yeah, for example, for my master's, it was a very like genetics heavy. I was in the lab, sequencing, all that kind of thing, learned a lot of skills. Published at least one paper from my master's. That was kind of it. Soon after finishing, in Portugal, the masters are also like 2 years. Soon after, I started thinking about a PhD and doing a PhD in Portugal. At the same time, I was lucky. My master supervisor, also got this like big European funded research project that was actually a collaboration using remote sensing. So they were having like satellite data, and we were trying to corroborate it with the biodiversity data. So it was kind of like species distribution modeling. So I got to be involved in that, and the project was 2 to 3 years long. So that was it was a good source of stability right after the master's. And I got to learn new skills, and also it was a bit of a collaborative project, international. Some of the colleagues were based in Austria and other European countries. So that was really interesting. And throughout that whole process, I applied at least a couple of times for the PhDs in Portugal. For those who don't know, it's very state-funded focus. It's very competitive, not that many opportunities. And it got to a point where I started thinking about, okay, if I was enjoying my academic career so far and I wanted to stay in research. Okay, next natural step is a PhD. And I started thinking of applying abroad. The project ended more or less in 2015. So there was that awkward period in 2015, 2016, where the project had finished. I was still helping out, wrapping up the project, writing up papers, applying for PhDs. Again, a lot of people here will know what I'm talking about. Yeah, I kind of cast my net fairly wide. At some point, I was this close to end up in Sydney, Australia, but I think I didn't get that, and I think my parents were really happy with that. But after at least 2 attempts, I finally got a PhD position in the United Kingdom in London. And this was part of what was at least at the time, I mean, yeah, it's going to be 10 years next year, which is depressing. It was part of the London doctoral training program, one of those DTPs that were very common a couple of years ago. They're still going nowadays. So it was a program that involved a lot of institutions. So the Natural History Museum, UCL, King's College, a lot of different universities. And I would say one of the advantages, and I got lucky with that program, is one, they still accepted EU students. Remember, 2016 was right after the Brexit vote. So I still managed to sneak into the UK before things got a bit more sour. So the program accepted EU students, which some programs in other universities didn't have vacancies for. And the fact that you got in the program and you automatically had basically project funding allocated to you. And only after you started the program, you would actually think about your project. So that gave me the space to actually like contact people in different institutions and think a bit outside of the box. Because again, at this moment, I'm coming a bit more from like conservation genetics, evolution, a bit of remote sensing kind of thing. But luckily, there was this interesting project on the evolution biomechanics of dinosaur hands. It was at the Natural History Museum and also UCL. Really great supervisors, and I thought, why not? The kid inside me was going completely crazy and just say, like, do it, go for it. And again, I barely any background in geology, don't really have any background in anatomy and morphology. So I still got to learn a lot of that on the go. And in the end, I had a great experience doing my PhD. Was really, again, fortunate to have supportive supervisors. Wasn't fun to write up a thesis during a pandemic as well. That was like the due date was 2020. I think I keep saying that the writing up the thesis actually kept me sane during the COVID years. And yeah, that working at the Natural History Museum, like Richie, like you do get exposure to you get a lot of working with curators, a lot of people that even working on the outreach and do social media and do all the stuff with the public. So it was a really fun place to work. And I got to do that as well, giving presentations to the public or working at the special events. But again, as we've seen, you start getting to the end of your PhD and you start thinking, what's the next step? I didn't get to actually, I didn't have time basically to develop my own projects and apply so much for grants. I did apply for a couple of postdocs unsuccessfully. But luckily, again, this was fortunate. One of my supervisors had this other project that was kind of wrapping up, and they needed someone to just finish up a couple of bits of research. So I had the shortest, like 2-month postdoc after submitting my thesis. But it was helpful. It helped me out those 2 months. And that one again, I changed a bit the fields. I gained a bit more knowledge because this one was actually more proper biomechanical. I was in UCL in an engineering lab testing the biomechanical properties. I was literally just pressing things into bone and just see how in terms of like elastic properties and things like that. It was an interesting process. But yeah, during all this time, I started thinking again. Let's think a bit outside of the box, and I started applying for non-academic work. I mean, I think I applied for a couple of like curator-related jobs at the museum, because again, at the time it was just starting this whole process of moving the collections. So they had some jobs going. I think I remember applying for a few jobs in the Royal Society or Linnean Society as well. There's a few jobs there you can consider in terms of managing grants and outreach. And I think very naturally, editorial jobs start popping up and started sounding interesting. They are fairly frequent. Again, sometimes it just depends on how lucky you are in the timing and what kind of broader fields of research, which journals are actually looking, which companies or journals are expanding, which people inside that you don't know about getting promoted and moving around. But there's often always some kind of editorial role, some kind of job going on. And I also remember I applied for a couple of these. I don't remember getting an interview for any of those except for the scientific reports one, where it was a bit of a grueling process. Like you have to do first you submit with a cover letter and a CV, very standard. But then often you have to go through a phase where they'll give you a paper to assess. So you have to pretend a bit you're already an editor and give you an assessment, find potential reviewers for a paper. And then eventually, if you keep going, if everything goes well, you get an interview. So for this one, it was actually the first interview that I got, and I was successful and joined Scientific Reports. The interesting thing with working for a journal like Scientific Reports is your background kind of doesn't matter at some point. Obviously, within my team, we do have people from very different backgrounds. I have colleagues of mine who study cancer. They're from neurosciences, physics, engineering, chemistry, psychology. And obviously, people will come to you whenever there's some doubts or specific issues that you're a bit more of an expert, even if it's broader. So, for example, right now, I'm kind of like the point of contact, not only for paleontology, but even like ecology and evolutionary sciences as a whole. Oh, one thing I do want to mention, during my PhD, I haven't managed to publish any of my PhD chapters. They're still there. I would love to do it, but especially after joining Scientific Reports and working as an editor, the last thing I want to do is after my workday to look at my own papers and think about the peer review process that I will have to go through. So all this to not basically don't feel discouraged if you don't get all your papers published or something like that. Depending on the job, it might not even be really that relevant. It's always a nice thing to have in your CV. Depending on the job, it might be key, but again, it's not might not be the absolute deal breaker. But yeah, so I joined in 2021 Scientific Reports, more or less 2 years after. It's a fairly standard progression system. It's kind of like just basic after 2 years or maybe less so, depending on how little extra activities and how keen you are. You getting promoted to a more senior position is a fairly standard process. And as an editor, excuse me. As an editor, you can kind of imagine some of the standard things you would think of an editor does. So there is manuscript handling. So you receive a paper, you do a first assessment. If it's suitable, you will find reviewers, you'll wait for their feedback, log a decision. If a paper goes through revisions, receive it back. And that's the continuous loop. And but and that's kind of like the traditional aspects of an editor at a scientific journal. With scientific reports, because again, as I mentioned, a lot of in terms of manuscript handling, that's actually mostly done by academic editors. So these are full-time researchers. Then on the side, will do this they'll do this peer review, both as editors and reviewers. But we're here basically we use always the metaphor of the pipeline, right? A paper gets submitted on one hand and should come out as accepted and published on the other end. So we're just kind of making sure that there's no clogs, nothing gets stuck, that we have the checks in place, especially for a lot of research, especially clinical research, ensuring that it's ethically sound, that it's following the standards for those specific fields. Also ensuring that what we're publishing is also sound and it's providing an original contribution. It's not just repeating what's been already published. One thing that I find really interesting at scientific reports, besides its very broad scope, so I'll see anything where the sun shines. It's also the fact that as a journal, we're not really judging papers in terms of impact or novelty, like other journals within the portfolio. So, for example, you'll think of Nature Ecology Evolution, Nature Communications, those kind of journals. They'll have a bit of like a threshold of what they want to publish. Where as long as the paper is reporting something that's technically sound and it's original, we should accept it. So you get a good mix of research. So yeah, a lot of my day it's a desk job. It's based on my email. It's just replying to emails and using other different systems. You try to advise a lot of our support team whether a paper is suitable or not. You try to answer questions that are the academic editors, we call editorial board members, if they have any issues. Sometimes it's actually just contacting academic editors and just reminding them, hey, this paper is delayed. Can you please take some action? It would be unfair for the authors. There's a lot of journal development. So, for example, at least in scientific reports, we call them collections, but in other places, we'll call special issues or call for papers. So that's a big thing nowadays. So thinking of new topics and then finding guest editors to contribute and coordinate those. That's a fun part of the process. Every now and then you attend conferences. Again, at scientific reports, you're less so commissioning work, which other editors at different journals might do. But we're there to kind of like assess the standard of the field, what are the hot topics, and and have a chance to interact with former colleagues. Another big aspect is research integrity. So whether before publication, but especially after publication. So paper has been published, but then either the authors themselves have noticed that actually the study has an issue, or they found a mistake and an error, and this needs to be corrected. Or sometimes the authors will say, sorry, we actually found an error in the code or something, and the paper needs to be retracted. Sometimes it's other readers, other people making a complaint about the work. Sometimes we also have, in this case at Spring in Nature, we have company-wide teams that are working specific on research integrity issues, and they'll basically sometimes do big audits and survey and just make sure that everything is running smoothly and as it should be. So that's also interesting, kind of sometimes a bit depressing because it shows a bit the bad side of science, and you do end up interacting a bit with some what we want to call them bad actors, but we also have a lot of people that are actually genuinely interested and they just want to ensure that the scientific record is sound and is true, right? Which is ultimately that's the goal. And you also tend to collaborate with people in other journals, other editors. So for example, I was a leader there was like a Nature editors community on ecology and evolution. So basically every month we get together and we'll talk about the latest research, any conferences, we'll have guest speakers. It could be researchers coming over and talk about their research or any hot topic or whatever issues is going on in the field. And as I said, like right now, I don't do much. I don't work specifically. I don't go through specifically only paleontology papers, although scientific reports, again, because of the broad scope, we do publish a lot of papers in paleontology. I have been fine. I always try to keep basically my eye out, and I try to contribute in a different way. So whether it is, for example, this was very early on, as soon as I joined the journal, I convinced my manager to publish this editor's choice. So this is more of like a retrospective collection, a bit of like, here's the best of what we published on dinosaurs up to that time. But also, again, going back to research integrity, there was this famous example from 2 years ago now of, for example, a lot of issues with fossil provenance and helicopter research, which are, again, very important topics nowadays. So ensuring that the record is updated, in this case, the fossils actually they were in Germany, they were in the museum in Frankfurt, but they actually have already been moved or soon to be moved to Brazil. So collaborating with authors and replying to readers or reviewers or again, academic editors. And especially when you feel that you're giving a bit back to the field and your field of interest in the types of research that you kind of fell in love with, feels really rewarding. I think I will wrap up here. Happy to take any questions, especially if you want to contact me, you can ask Orla for my email or just reach me in Blue Sky, drop me a message there and then we can get in touch, especially if you have more questions of like job applications or more details about what is being an editor for scientific reports or other journals.
Oh, thank you so much. That was really, really interesting. I think it's the part of in sort of the typical postdoc space where things are across academia where we don't have we have a bit of a blind spot in terms of what really goes on once our papers are submitted. So it's nice to hear what's going on the other side, and also from a fellow paleontologist as well, in terms of how that sort of led you to where you are now, but also it means when you are handling paleontological work, you have these sort of better insights, right? So again, I've made a list of questions. So please, everybody, use the Q&A as needed as well. And we will quickly move on to Liz there. Sorry to put you at the end, Liz. There was no reason for that except for who was in front of me on the screen. So Liz, if you want to share your slides as well and get started.
There we go. Can you guys see that? Excellent. Okay, yeah, thanks for inviting me, Orla. I'm going to talk a little bit about, as she mentioned, I'm the paleobiology lab manager at the University of Bristol. I will start off by saying I'll try and go through this quickly, but this may not be as polished as others due to the fact that I have a 3-month-old child and I have been doing this, and I'm doing this while I'm on my maternity leave. So yeah, I may be slightly scattered. It's not my usual. But I will go through a little bit of my background of how I got here and what it's like to be a technician, because I think it's something that not a lot of people kind of think about as a paleontology career. Oh, okay, now it's skipped a bunch. Why has it done that? There we go. Okay, so a bit about me. So like Allison, I'm also Canadian, but I'm from Alberta, where all of those wonderful late Cretaceous fossils come from. So it's one of the best places in the world for particularly late Cretaceous dinosaur fossils, lots of terrestrial things. And I really got kind of thrown into that in my undergrad. So I did my BSc in paleontology at the University of Alberta. You get lots of great experience of things like preparation. I did field work in a dinosaur dig, which was literally in Edmonton on university property. It's quite a convenient place to learn how to, do some field work and get these different skills. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today is kind of how I built these different skills into becoming a technician. So that's kind of where it started. And this is where people normally say, well, then why did you leave Alberta to come to the UK? But although Alberta is really great for dinosaurs, my love in research has always been pterosaurs. So I'm really interested in the evolution of flight and how pterosaurs got so big, how they were able to fly, all of these kind of questions. And although there's lots of dinosaurs in Alberta, there's actually very few pterosaurs. So even the large late Cretaceous forms, they're very uncommon. And there's also nobody in Alberta who works on pterosaurs. So if you want to work on that, you kind of have to leave, which is why I moved to the UK. So I did an MSc in paleobiology at the University of Bristol. And this is where I first started working on CT scans. So my project was looking at how you can estimate pterosaur mass using CT scans, and this is where I first kind of got really interested in this kind of side of paleontology and what we can learn from CT scans. I then went on to do a PhD at the University of Southampton. So I kind of continued this work looking at more generally pterosaur mass and pneumaticity and other aspects of anatomy, all using CT scans. So this was kind of the first large study on pterosaurs using CT scans. There hadn't been kind of a big study before, partially because there aren't a lot of fossils and they're quite difficult to study. So I started, learning a lot of skills of how you can do this. We also continued doing field work. So I did some field work in Romania, built a lot of different skills of, how to do things like jacket a fossil in a riverbed, which is not a fun thing to do. And I don't recommend anybody do that, but that's what we did. And, working in collection visits and working with curators and getting the kind of hands-on fossil experience that way. Then my PhD finished, and like everyone, I was then looking for jobs. I did a lot of applying for postdocs and fellowships and got quite close to several, but didn't quite make it. So in the meantime, I was, doing what jobs I could, and one of them was working in a biomedical lab at the University of Bristol as a research assistant. And this is, completely different from paleontology, but it was looking at osteoarthritis mutations in zebrafish, and it's all kind of physical mutations that they're looking at. And this is mainly done using CT scans. So this was where I actually learned how to use a scanner. Previously, I had been working on scans that somebody else had done, but with this position, I was able to operate the scanner on my own. Learned a lot of different techniques of, best way of scanning things, density measurements, all of these different things you can do with a scanner. And also working with extant organisms. So previously I had only ever done kind of fossil CT work, and now I'm working on extant zebrafish. I then went on to do a kind of what I thought was the shortest postdoc, but apparently Joao has the shortest postdoc, which was a kind of 6-month postdoc research assistant position looking at Eoherpeton. So it's a early tetrapod, and learned more about the kind of post-processing of scanning. So this was doing some retrodeformation on this for biomechanical analyses further on. And just kind of developing that skill set a little bit more. I then went on to work on this absolutely horrendous fossil pterosaur from the Isle of Skye. So this was one of those weird things. I applied for a postdoc at the Natural History Museum, I didn't get the job, but after the interview, Paul Barrett said, "Do you want to come and see this fossil?" and showed me this pterosaur fossil and asked if I wanted to work on it. So I suggested that we scan it because that's my favorite thing to do with any fossil that I see. And we got this little Paleontographical Society grant and went and scanned it in Bristol. Which at this point, it wasn't my job to do the scanning, but this is where I got to learn quite a bit more about how you scan really difficult material. Previously, I had only been scanning extant zebrafish, which are comparatively extremely easy to scan, as opposed to this horrendous, full of pyrite block of pterosaur. So getting a bit more experience about how to actually scan different materials and how it works. I then shortly after that, was told that our lab manager at the University of Bristol was going to be going on paternity leave for 6 months, and they were looking for somebody to take over for him. And because I had particularly shown such an interest in the scanning side of things and had been in the labs in various different capacities over the year, they asked if I was interested, also because I was still unemployed and had not succeeded at any of my other applications. But at this point, I was actually waiting to hear back from a BBSRC fellowship, which I had been shortlisted for. And I decided to do this. So this was from December 2019 to July 2020, which, if we all remember 2020, that was a very interesting position of becoming the lab manager and doing it from home for about half of that, because I was actually working from my front room, which meant that a lot of the things I was expecting to do during that position turned into actually being sort of general tech support and IT management and various things I wasn't really expecting to do, but you have to adapt and be flexible. That's a big part of being a technician. And then I came back, or I finished that job, and then about a month later, the lab manager told me that actually he was leaving the position and that it would be advertised and that I should think about applying. So I decided to go ahead and do that and became a permanent core funded staff since November 2020. So I'm officially a technical specialist. So this is not just kind of a lab manager as a sort of admin manager side, but as you have to have some sort of technical expertise, which for me is the CT scanning side of things. A little bit about my job, because I think, as I mentioned before, a lot of people don't necessarily know what a technician does, and in particular what my position is. So mainly it's a bit like what Richie was saying. It's kind of facilitating other research. So my job is to make sure that the researchers in the paleobiology group in Bristol can do what they need to do. And the first really major part of that is health and safety. So it's looking at risk assessments, making sure that we have everything in place so that we can do it safely and that we're following all of the regulations that people need. It's also finances, so I do a lot of budgeting, making sure that the facility and the lab budget is healthy and we can buy the equipment that we need and things that people need to actually do their research, making sure that we have all of the consumables that are needed. A lot of this is up to the individual researchers, but I kind of have an overview of it and make sure that it's all there. Working with other university groups and areas, so things like the biosafety committee, so anybody who's working on extant organisms have to make sure that we follow biosafety rules. Anybody doing especially taphonomy is a fun one when it comes to biosafety. And these are things that we kind of, I make sure that our researchers are talking to the right people and doing it the right way. It's ultimately their responsibility, but I kind of help facilitate it and make sure that they're doing it properly. And then, of course, the XTM facility. So we now actually have 2 CT scanners. So we run this Nikon CT, and we also have a SkyScan benchtop CT scanner, as well as the facility with 12 workstations with lots of different software and they're very high-powered workstations that people can do the research they need. So that's a large part of my job, is managing that facility. And that's, again, kind of where the position came from for me. It's my side of things was the CT scanning software, developing those different skills. So if you're interested in becoming a technician, I think kind of the most important thing is those sort of hard skills. So think about picking up as many different skills as you can along the way, what sort of qualifications you might need for it. So for me, it really was because I was interested in everything to do with CT scanning. I just kept asking questions. I asked if I could get involved on things. Could I see how this works? How do you change the filament? How do you do this? How does this work? And I felt like I was being really annoying at the time, but ultimately, because I was doing that, as soon as they needed somebody to do the job, they said, are you interested? Because you know more about it than other people do. I think similarly with different types of software, programming, all of these different things, it's picking up those hard skills so that you have a wide breadth of knowledge and skills that you can actually do in the future. But soft skills are also extremely important as a technician. So as I said before, it's facilitating other people's research. You need to be flexible. You need to have good communication and make sure that people are listening to what you're doing. And there's quite a lot of teamwork. And you have to be able to kind of work with other people quite significantly, because it's not just you in a bubble doing things, you're doing things for other people, and it's really important. And it's important to think about the qualifications. So I'm talking specifically about a paleontology technician, but there's also, quite a lot of jobs in biology or geology, different types of technical things. They might require a PhD, but more often they will require something like an MSc or something less than that. It just really depends on the job and what they're expecting you to do from it. So there's a couple of things. I'm going to be honest, when I was first asked about doing this job permanently, I did not think I wanted to do it, because like Richie, I wanted to be an academic. That was my, I was going to be a professor. That's kind of what we all think. And then it was actually my husband who said, okay, but you can still do research, and you don't have to write grants, and you don't have to write papers. Like, you can, but it's not something that somebody is, checking off to make sure that you're doing it all the time. And I kind of thought about it and went, maybe actually this is a good job. Maybe I do want to do this. So for me, pros definitely, I have written grant applications, but I'm not expected to. It's entirely up to me if I want to do that. Again, papers, up to me if I want to. It's a little bit more 9 to 5, so thinking about work-life balance. Academics tend to work more in the evenings and weekends, and there's absolutely zero expectation for me to do that ever. I can turn off my emails when I leave and never look at them again. It's up to me. I don't have to, I don't mind teaching. I don't like marking. I don't have to do that as a technician, so that's great. And the main thing is that it's always something new. It's every day is something completely different. Somebody will bring me some fossil to scan that I've never even heard of. I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. You sit down, you work through it. Some people will bring me something for the wet lab, because I also manage, taphonomy experiment labs and very different things that I have to think about. That's not my background. So then I have to sit back and go, okay, how can we do it? It's never no, but it's how are we going to make this work? Which kind of leads to the cons, which, there is not as much research potential. So if you really want to do the research, there's not as much time to do that. Or at least it's changed. So a lot of the research I think about now is more methodological. How do you do scanning in certain ways? How can we, do certain lab procedures better? That kind of thing. It's also working often to other people's deadlines. So what often happens is people will come to me and say, I need to do this thing by the end of this week. And it's okay, you know, again, it's not no, but how can we make that happen? Because sometimes it is no by the end of this week because it's just not possible. But, you know, trying to do that, which leads to the side of kind of being the bad guy. Sometimes I do have to say no, and I do have to, at least not right now, or not in that way, because sometimes when it comes down to things like health and safety, you can't rush it, and you do have to make sure that people are following the rules and the risk assessments, because if you don't, then you can end up, you know, having somebody be seriously injured, and it's really difficult to do that. And the other thing is that there's just generally less opportunity for promotion. So with a kind of standard academic position, you can go from a lecturer to a senior lecturer to a professor. You know, there's a ladder that you can follow, but that's not the same way with a technical position, because technical positions are the job. And it's, if you want to get promoted, then you have to apply to another job, or you have to prove that your job has changed. And that can be very difficult to do. But you know, there's lots of really great things about it. And if you are interested in kind of technical positions and want to ask questions, I'm happy to answer them. You can send me an email, but just note that I am technically on maternity leave until January, so I may not reply very rapidly, but I am happy to answer questions and yeah, do anything anybody's interested in.
Thank you so much, Liz. And again, also a big thank you for doing this while on your maternity leave. I did very cheekily email her during her maternity leave. I know it was very bad, but I knew that Liz would be great for this panel. So I gave it a go and you're here. So thank you. I really appreciate it. I have just one thing to add. Richie just said as well that he also, with your pros and cons list, Liz, that's something that's very similar to him as well. So something to bear in mind when you're kind of looking at all these different career paths, is sort of looking at the pros and cons, which there is to all of these careers, right? So there's good and there's bad things. So thank you all so much for sharing those presentations and those experiences. It's always extremely important and refreshing when we hear about failures. I think one very common trend across all of you is rejections and saying no. And I think everyone has different challenges in their jobs, but also great highlights as well. So I think it's really important to see how everyone's skills that they've acquired during their sort of PhD and younger years, how they've all integrated into all of your different career paths now. So it's really, really nice to see. I'm going to hand over to Nydia now, and Nydia is going to go through some of the questions that we have in the Q&A.
Hello, thank you so much for your talks. I thought they were all very interesting. We have a few questions coming in now, so if you don't mind, some of them have like addressed to someone in particular, but most of them are just kind of in general. So the first one is for everyone. And Xavier asks, does age matter? Can someone in their 50s aspire towards an academic career? I'm going to say first, go for it. And now, please go for it. It's never too late to do something like this. And now everyone else can go. So I don't know, does anyone want to chip in or add something to this? Shall I?
Oh, sorry.
Hi, Richie, go. Yeah.
I'd just like to say, so we've hired 2 people. So my team, the invertebrate and plant paleobiology curatorial team, we've hired 2 people in the last 18 months, both over 50, as full-time invertebrate paleontology curators, both from a research kind of background. So one of those being a colleague who did a PhD later in life, and another one who sort of was an established researcher already. So two very different sort of stages of their careers, but you know, I had got there. I had got there at a older age, and you know, and they are working absolutely fine with us. So I don't think so. No, if it's if it's something you're passionate about, I don't think that should put you off. As long as the only, I guess, issue could be like if you can still commit to it, and if you can, then why shouldn't you?
Great, thank you. Anyone else want to add to this question? Okay, so the next question, I guess this one is for Richie. So Lucia is asking, how much of your time as a curator can you spend doing research?
So it's pretty variable, and I wouldn't want to sort of speak for curators everywhere, because obviously the job itself is variable by institution. But I'll just talk about within my team, again, the invertebrates and plant paleobiology curatorial team. We all have written into our job description that we should be involved with scholarship. Whether that means doing our own research and writing papers is down to the individual. So some of us, as I mentioned earlier, some of us are from research backgrounds and then became and learned to be curators, having expertise on a thing, whereas other people knew how to be a curator and then had to develop expertise on a thing. So how much experience we have in being an academic is really variable. So for me, I spent a number of years of my life doing postgraduate degrees and being a researcher. So I'm happy to keep doing that, because I enjoy it, and it really benefits me as a curator to keep immersed in the academic literature and the academic side of it. So for me, in my job description, I am supposed to spend 20% of my time doing research or other scholarly activities. But for me, because I am from a research background, that equates to just doing research. And that tends to just be doing things I'm interested in on my own, as opposed to applying for grants and being involved in big projects with sort of more pet project type stuff.
Okay, thank you. So shall we change a little bit the question and ask everyone else as well? So Liz, for example, you kind of touched on that on your talk, that that you do a different type of research. So how much time of your technician work do you think is you use to do this kind of methodological research? And also, would you like to be able to do more research in terms of your own research interests?
Yeah, so officially, my job does not include any research. Unofficially, my manager says I can do as much as I want to, and he doesn't really mind what it is, whether it's actually directly related to kind of technical things or if it's more, my pterosaur work from things I'm interested in. He's happy for me to do it as long as it doesn't interfere with my normal day-to-day job. Unofficially, the research group is very keen for me to get more involved in research, because it makes it that I can do more in the lab if I'm doing research. It's better for the group, it's better for the university if I'm doing more interesting things that way. So I try and swing it more on the side of the kind of technical thing, because then I have a better excuse to spend my time on it. If it's, related to CT scanning, then I can spend my day doing it. Whereas if it's writing a paper describing a pterosaur, that's not really related to my day-to-day job. I do wish I had a little bit more time for it, but ultimately, I can kind of swing it in some ways the way that I want to. It is a very busy job. I'm, very seldom at my desk sitting, I don't really have a lot of time to just sit and write papers, because I'm never sitting at my desk doing things. But I think that if you can get involved with things, a lot of the way that I do end up doing research is just getting involved with other people's projects. So sometimes people will come to me with something and say, I want to scan this. And it's something completely different that I have absolutely no idea how to do. And we try lots of different methods and do it. And, that's where my research comes in, because I can help with, different setups on the scanner, or how there's like actual physical mounting, there's different, staining techniques, there's all these different things we can try, and it kind of turns into that side. So I don't do a lot of, directing my own research, but I might get involved in lots of other people's projects, which I think is sort of the way that it tends to work, if that answers the question.
Alison, do you want to chip in here as well?
Yeah,
Yep.
I'd love to answer this question too, because it's actually not a huge percentage of my time that I do research now. My own research where I'm looking at the fossil and I'm a first author paper. I haven't had a first author paper since 2019. That's partly because I actively chose to develop leadership and management skills for a few years to give it a try. When I first started my job as professor, I had 50% on my duties, or they call it cahier de charge here. 50% was allocated to teaching, to research, which was very high compared to other professors at the time. It's definitely gone down. And the way that I do research has changed. During your PhD, you're leading it, you're the one doing it, you're writing the papers. My engagement with research now is through my team, so supervising students, advising them what they should do, guiding them through the steps of writing a paper, training them, helping them explore questions, giving them the tools they need to do their research, which is wonderfully fulfilling. So, but it sort of changes the role. I'm often last author on the paper now because I'm directing and advising the people who are doing the active research. And then the other involvement with research is more like the planning, getting funding. So writing grant applications, coming up with the next idea that then hires people through the funding, and then you work with the researchers as they do that. I really want to get back to research again, firsthand research where I look at fossils. So when I'm done being director in 2017, I'm owed a sabbatical. I'm gonna go back to aiming for that, like 30 to 40% of my time, like a good 1 to 2 days a week doing research would be my goal. And I think that's realistic for a professor because you also have teaching. There will always be administrative contributions that people should be making to the department, being on committees, helping with things like safety, helping with development of strategy. These things are also part of the job. So like, I don't actually do as much research as people might think. You think, oh, academic job, that person must be doing research all day, every day. I facilitate and I'm involved in a lot of research, but it's absolutely not how it was when I was a PhD and a postdoc. And the reality is that I have a fairly small percentage of research in my time as well.
I think that's it's very true for almost any job of career that we decide to go into, right? I think the false advertisement, I think in academia overall, is the idea that we are all getting permanent research positions. And actually, I'm happy to be argued on this point. I don't think a permanent research position actually exists, even though our PhDs and our postdocs, that's a lot of our probably the happiest times in terms of if you enjoy the really kind of research part of all the other aspects of PhD and postdocs that you do, but there's so many others, and it's really important, I think, for everyone here to realize that with our career panelists here, that they all have a very amazing set of skills that allow them to do a job that facilitates research in some aspect in a lot of ways, and research is almost only one side of a lot of things. So I think it's important to say that it is in a large in the sense is even with a lecture as well, right, Alison? You lecture, and I think Liz, you said that you do a bit of lecturing as well. That that's another aspect of teaching. Again, it's not research, but it is also showing the younger students and the younger generation about research and about these topics, which is enjoyable for other levels. So yeah, I think it's something that's really important that we touch on. So Nydia, sorry, go ahead with the other questions. I think there's a lot for you, Liz.
There is, yeah. So there's here a question for Liz. As a lab manager slash technician, does your role fall under professional services? And if so, do you find any challenges with your management not valuing research and or teaching responsibilities?
Yeah, so I am technically professional services, which I always think is weird. I think it used to be separate. They used to have technical and professional separate, but universities like to make things easier by putting everything together. Um, for me personally, I don't have a lot of challenges with management not valuing research because my manager is fantastic. He's absolutely supportive of any research that I want to do. And similarly with the research group, they're quite supportive. But I do know other technicians in other facilities that don't have that same value. And it can be very frustrating, definitely feeling like you're not being supported to do the things that you want to do. Yeah, I think it's just a kind of luck of the draw with that. And hopefully you get somebody that supports you. But I think that's a tricky one.
Then Ed actually continues underneath. I don't know if you can see this. It's a big paragraph,
I
but
think
yeah,
I've read.
yeah. So basically, he asked if you think this will change anytime soon at Bristol or elsewhere.
Yeah, so it's a tricky thing with the kind of promotion. So there is something called the Technician's Commitment, which came out, I think 2015 it started, which is a big group of universities and institutions who are trying to work together to change the framework of pay and promotion for technical staff. It Despite the fact that the University of Bristol is, signed up for it, it still doesn't have that same allowing you to be promoted side. There's still you have to regrade in order to be promoted, which is tricky. So I have successfully got my position regraded. Um, because it was truly not the grade that I was hired in. There were some very easy things that I could pick out and say, I do that, I do that, I do that. And they supported me to do that. But it does make it difficult, and I'm hoping that it will change. I think that other universities that I've heard who have signed up to the technician's commitment have more of a kind of pipeline progression, make it a little bit easier to actually progress. Because I think it's actually absolutely crazy that you can be a technician for 15 years and continuing to gain skills and do things, but you can't actually get promoted unless your job changes. And then it kind of makes you feel like, well, why do I bother learning all these new things if I'm never going to be able to do something else with it unless you decide to change positions. But if you're, set up at your institution, you may not want to move, and that position that uses the skills, you kind of have to wait for somebody to leave in order to take it. So I think it is starting to change. At least I hope it is. But I don't know. I do sometimes feel like the kind of upper management doesn't fully value the position as much as the kind of people right next to you who see your contribution. They value it, but the university upper echelons don't necessarily realize that without us, that research isn't happening.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. Thank you. So there's actually 3 questions in a row. So let's go one by one. So could you please walk us through the usual steps or qualifications needed to become a museum curator? So that's for Ritchie.
Yeah, to be honest, it's very difficult to do that. I tried to sort of get this across a few points, a few times while I was giving my presentation and when I've spoke since. People in my sort of professional group come from 2 sort of distinct routes into how they became a curator. People with scientific expertise on particular kinds of fossils, so like me with arthropods, like with my colleague Katie with bivalves, like with my colleague Nadia with corals. people who have research background and expertise in a particular group of organisms is there. We want to hire people like that and then train them to be a curator. But likewise, we recognize that some things that we have a collection of, it's very difficult to find someone who is an expert on that very, very niche thing. And that's when we turn to hiring someone who knows how museums work, who knows what it takes to be a curator, and then they can learn on the job about the organisms that they're curating the fossil collection of. So there's sort of two different paths. So I would say, if you know you want to be involved in museum but don't know what sort of thing you want to curate, then there are specialized postgraduate degrees. So, for example, at University College London, I know they do an MS, and I think, I'm not sure if it's an MA or an MSc course in museum studies, and a lot of people will do that course because they know they want to have a career in museums. They might not know whether they want to be a fossil curator. They might want to be an archivist. They might want to be a conservationist, or they might not know what kind of museum professional. They might just like the museum environment. Something it is a very enchanting place that a lot of people enjoy and want to be a part of. So yeah, it's a difficult question to answer, but they are the sort of two pathways that I'm aware of when I look around at my curatorial colleagues, the researchers who we train to be curators and the curators that we train to be experts on the thing they're going to curate.
Just to weigh in there, Richie, what you said, and it's really true. There's kind of no set pathway as such, but then there's two areas generally where curators come from. And then for those that aren't maybe based in the UK, so for example, here in Central Europe and Germany, there's one option to do if you were, I know Germany will definitely do it, and I know that there's some people here who are in Germany. For example, you can do sort of unfortunately an unpaid, but an internship for either 2 months or longer, where you're actually sort of an assistant curator to some of the curators here, and you can gain experience that way. So there's other opportunities around Europe, and as Richard said about reaching out to him, but of course, if you reach out to other places maybe near you too, there's different countries opt differently with the curational role, 100%. Which can be quite difficult, but it's good to reach out. As you said, you're always happy to talk people through it as well, right? So
yeah, totally. So I mean, I'll just add that. So I got I had correspondence as recently as 2 weeks ago. Someone who's starting a MSc in London in this autumn, who's looking for a museum experience because they're interested in a career in museums. And so I'm going to take that person on as an intern once a week for like a period of time to let them just gain skills in being around natural history specimens and the sort of day-to-day tasks that I do. Because one, I think it's good to invest in the future of people, and I want to be a good person. But also, it helps me. It's great to have assistance with tasks that are rudimental and can be laborious as well. So I'm more than happy to do stuff like that.
Super, thanks. So this one is for, am I saying your name correctly, Joao?
Sure, don't worry
sorry.
about it.
I usually butcher names. I'm so sorry.
I do the same.
So what qualifications or experience are typically required to become an editor in the publishing industry? And I'm also going to add to that because I had a question for you. Did you have any experience, any of those experiences before you applied for the job?
No, and a lot of editorial jobs are entry-level jobs. So you are starting, you're not expected, especially if it's like associate editor level, you're not expected to have prior experience in editorial or publishing. So for a lot of these associate editor level jobs, they are entry level, but they do often require a PhD, sometimes a master's. Again, depends on the journal, depends on the type of role, depends on if it's a full-time or it's a bit more part-time, for example. If it's a big publisher, or if it's like, for example, I know that the Natural History Museum has its own journal that works with a big publisher. So stuff like that. So yeah, usually a PhD. There are sometimes more of an editorial assistant jobs or related to specific aspects where you're not necessarily doing the peer review or handling manuscripts. You're actually just doing, for example, quality checks at submission, ensuring that the manuscript files and all the information is there, that all the statements, that the offer list all adds up. Those like a bit more, again, more laborious tasks. Sometimes there's also those jobs going, and for those, sometimes you might only need like an undergraduate. So something to keep in mind. Obviously, if you have prior experience, if you had work at another journal, often you can apply directly to be a senior editor. And then after senior editor, just to also explain a bit more of the career path. Often afterwards, it becomes very like managerial job, right? You stop handling kind of like instead of doing research, you stop also handling papers. And if you become a chief editor, or some journals have deputy editors in between chief editors and other editors, depending how big the team is. You'll handle a few papers, but you're actually mostly just managing people, managing how many submissions, how many papers, policy changes, coordinating with other journals. Again, especially once if you're part of a big publisher like Spring and Nature or one of the other big ones, it is also it quickly gets very corporate, right? And it's a private company. You start hearing about profits and margins and things like that, other sides of budgeting, which sometimes if you're coming from a research background, you're kind of like, what, how many digits? So you need to sometimes reframe your brain in that sense. So there's that part, and I wanted to mention something else. And obviously when you're applying, it depends on the field of research that the journal is looking for, right? When I applied, they were looking for someone with ecology. It was the ad was fairly broad, like it was pretty much anyone with ecology, environmental, basically life science background. The journal expanded its scope to engineering and psychology. So we really wanted someone with like human behavior, psychology background, or people with actually mechanical engineering, computer engineering, whatever kind of engineering. We wanted people with those specific backgrounds. So sometimes it's a matter of luck of what a journal or a company is looking for. And also worth keeping in mind, and this is something also relates to a question, the next question. Depends also where, especially again, these big companies often have offices all across the world. And also about being lucky of where are they hiring, where they're expanding the teams. So for example, my team we have people, there's a big core here in London. I have colleagues in the US, colleagues in Germany, colleagues in India, colleagues in China. I know there's offices also in Madrid and Italy and other places. So there is flexibility, things to keep in mind also in terms of remote working. So for example, I come into the office like twice a week, then the other days work from home. So there's a lot of these kind of things also when you're applying and thinking about qualifications. And just to wrap up and like circle back to what Alison mentioned, don't apply, even if you think that you don't tick every single box, apply. Even if your background is not necessarily lined up, apply. First of all, you'll get experience applying. You get your name there. Someone might keep your name in their mind, and all of a sudden there's a vacancy in other journals, and maybe people will reach out to you and actually, do you want this role? Because we were thinking, and you actually, yeah, you would be a great match for this. So apply. And for a lot of these editorial roles, they are entry level. So you're not expected to have that much experience.
Thank you so much for that answer, How
Thank
it's
you.
actually so true. The next question, which you just got onto there as well, which I do want to touch on a little bit more with Alison, because I also know that you also have a lot of experience with moving around in terms of for jobs and everything else elsewhere. But I know that Liz has to scoot off in a minute, so I'm just going to quickly let Liz answer the question that we'd had there about securing a permanent or a technical position and how long that might typically take given sort of the evolving landscape of higher education right now.
Yeah, I was just kind of typing an answer because I'm going to have to run to the very hungry baby. But I think it's kind of a really tricky thing to say about how long it might take. But It depends a lot on different schools and how universities do it. So in earth sciences at Bristol, for example, the vast majority of the technicians are permanent core funded because they have earth sciences really puts their kind of money into it, and they're really supportive of it and know how important it is to have technicians that know what they're doing and they want to support them. On the other hand, other schools that I work with quite closely, the technicians are often permanent. So it's like an open-ended contract, but subject to funding. And so that means that every year they have to make sure that the academics have put into their grants that they need funding for a technician, which so far is working. But at some point, somebody will not get that grant, and that person who's been doing that job for 10 years will lose their job. And then who is going to pick up that job? And I think that's something that's really frustrating. But it comes down to kind of what Ed was asking about and what I was saying before about making that sort of technical position be important and changing the views of how we view technical positions and making sure that kind of upper management in universities value it, because they should be wanting to support people who are there long term rather than only for a year or two while on a grant. But I unfortunately can't really say anything about the second part of how long it will take to get a permanent position, because most of them, I don't really know a lot of people who have jumped around between short ones and then got a permanent one. It's not kind of the same as a postdoc that you might do that. It's just a matter of whether or not the position that you apply for is a permanent one or not. But hopefully that kind of helps to answer that.
Absolutely. And you're right, you kind of touched on a really important point there where maybe universities allow, Alison, for example, being a PI in a grant, having to pick up the slack, right, of having to incorporate technicians into these because they're not facilitating as many of those positions anymore, even though we have probably more labs than ever in university settings. So there's a disconnect between universities hiring permanent and then having to actually put these positions into grants and relying on and putting pressure on other staff members to retain essentially other staff members, right? So it's a wider issue going on there. That's a really good point, Liz. Liz, I want to say thank you so much for your time. So feel free to scoot off and feed your new babies.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. And again, if anybody wants to email me questions, please feel free. But I'm going to go rescue my husband from a screaming baby now.
Completely. That's absolutely fine. Thank you so much again for your time. Take care, Liz.
Bye.
So moving on to essentially, it's the same question, Alison, about securing a permanent academic position and sort of the current prospects in the landscape. I guess you have plenty of experience of, you've lived in more than 3 countries, I guess, and have a lot of experience obviously between Europe and actually North America. So
yeah, I think I was thinking how to answer this question. I think broadly speaking, for paleontology, this is a stable and necessary science that has no risk of disappearing. Like there's an intrinsic interest of people to want to know about fossils and ancient life. So while paleontology as a field that can supply jobs for like the long term, I don't worry that paleontology is disappearing, right? There's always going to be a need and a want from people to learn about fossils. They're often, papers in paleo are often in the news. You know, people think of museums, they often think of like dinosaur fossils and fossils, right? And those collections are only growing. Maybe Richie can touch on this after, but like we're just out there collecting more and more stuff. Collections are growing. You always will need people to manage those collections. So I think broadly speaking, paleo is a good field. It's not like in a massive boom that's expanding. It probably never will be, but it's stable and it's recognized by earth scientists and biologists as like a necessary field. There should always be a role of paleontology in those sciences. So I would say like prospects are good in the sense of it's a field that's not about to like disappear. Is it how long does it take to get a permanent academic job specifically? in a university setting, which I know best, at least in, at UNIL here, we typically hire people that are between like 3 and 8 years after their PhD. This I've noticed is sort of the trend. Occasionally, once in a while, we have, someone who has maybe 10 years or 12 years of experience and they apply for a post. Our hiring practices are specifically aimed at someone with a lot of experience we could hire if they're from a minority background or they're a woman, because we're trying to increase our extremely low numbers of like women profs. So sometimes, we've recently hired a woman professor who had 15 years post-PhD experience. But it's very rare. Typically, it's in this age range of 3 to 8 years, I've noticed, is when people are getting permanent or at least tenure track professor positions in the academic setting. And just to touch on the perspective from UNIL for the technical posts, what Liz was saying about how there are posts that can be funded by a grant and they're sort of more temporary, and then there's permanent posts that are technical posts. The Switzerland perspective is that the university does generally have a slowly increasing number of technical posts. It's not a massive boom. It's not like a curve, but we've been able to expand our lab facilities and our collections and get like one new permanent full-time technical post every 5 years or so. So at least at UNIL, and those jobs, they're written into the permanent stabilized contract of the university. They're not dependent on a research grant. It's why it takes 5 years to get a new one, because we have to argue over and over again to the direction of the university, hey, rectors, we need this position. We can't run our labs properly. We need this research support. But it has been a slow and steady increase and not a decrease, despite facing some budget challenges. So I think, at least in some countries, my perspective is from Switzerland, it's valued. The topic of promoting technical staff is really difficult. That also requires then permanently increasing the budget associated with that salary. So it's hard, but it's a challenge that I think multiple countries are aware of this challenge, and there's different perspectives like globally that we can bring to it. So I would say like prospects are good. They're not decreasing. They're maybe slightly increasing, and that typically takes like within the 10 years after your PhD. For academic side, I think, for the publishing curatorial sides, I think the timeline could be very different. Richie, you mentioned hiring people that were in their 50s who had a lot more experience, right? So yeah, maybe feel free to jump in and expand.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say that so those two people I had in mind, similar age but very different trajectories. One person who'd done a PhD much later in life, another person who'd had quite an established career and was an expert in the thing that we hired them to be a curator of. I mean, I'm very lucky in the way that, so this is my first academic, well, it's academic adjacent job, I suppose I would say, being a curator at the NHM is. It was my first job after my PhD, and I only got it really because of, I was just fortunate that the person who left that I was a very good replacement for happened to leave. That is the tricky thing about being a curator. There's not lots of these jobs. That's not to say that there isn't lots of jobs at museums. The Natural History Museum employs like 1,000 people. It's a huge sprawling organization with all kinds of different roles associated with collections. It's not just it's not just curators who work with the paleontology collection. As I mentioned in my presentation, there's all kinds of teams of people, many of whom have PhDs in paleontology or other related disciplines, that work in the conservation team, who are, the people who are working on preparing new fossils and preserving old fossils that are falling to bits. Very specialized skill. And so I guess the point I just want to try and make is that the career path Alison described is exactly what I thought I was going into when I did my PhD. And then it's sort of by chance that I did something else, but it's not a bad thing. I feel very, very happy in this role. I'm fortunate that it came about, but it did. And there's no reason that, you can't, the other people doing masters and PhDs thinking about being a researcher, being an academic, it's not the only door it opens to you. And yeah, the role I do straddles a couple of different things within paleontology, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Richie. And for also weighing in on that as well. I think it's a really, really good point. The next question, which I think is really important, actually, yeah, as Emily has pointed out here, applies to most of the panel. How we'll start with you, which is realistically, do you think we have to be willing to relocate in order to get the very limited positions? So I think everyone here has experience with moving around and everything. So I'm interested to hear that. I'll firstly just quickly say that we'll answer this question. I have one very quick question for you all, and then we will complete the webinar because I'm very aware how long I've kept all of you at this point. So bear with us for 2 more questions, and we'll call it a night. So how, if you want to start off.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. No, don't worry.
Yeah, I think realistically, you always need to keep a flexible mindset, and that includes relocating, moving within your country, moving outside of your country, and that's one of the biggest decisions you can make, honestly, in your life at any stage. You're leaving family, friends, cultures behind, and sometimes politics gets behind. Like I still managed to squeeze into the UK just before Brexit started become really a thing. Like nowadays, I wouldn't recommend, and it's probably even really difficult or not feasible to, even if you're from an EU country, to try to go to a PhD or something else in the UK. And everyone knows what's going on in the US right now. So there's also those kind of things to consider. So if you're coming from an academic research background, I think unfortunately, because the jobs, as Alison say, like certain fields are stable, and other fields are expanding and other ones are contracting. Unfortunately, there is a limited pool for the amount of people that are actually doing the undergraduates, doing getting their degrees. So yeah, I think that's an unfortunate aspect. But once again, I think you just need to not necessarily give up. Like you can do a PhD, you can do a master's in paleontology or the field that you really love, and maybe park it, go do something else, your 9-to-5 job that pays the bills, and you keep these things on a hobby. I knew a colleague from mine when I was doing the PhD. He was a former police lieutenant or something like that here in the UK, and so another person that did a PhD later in life, like he retired, he went up the ladder within the police. So don't let that dream die. But also there's a realistic aspect of you want a stable job, you want to progress in other aspects of your life. So yeah, I think sometimes people in academia and research get a bit too much like this is the only way and this is my dream. And if I don't do a PhD, after my PhD I don't go do a postdoc, I fail. And it's quite the opposite.
I think that's actually really, really nice sentiment to make, that just because we don't go for these traditional routes of becoming, I think everyone goes into it and we're sort of sold this idea of either a lectureship or a PI position being sort of the only positions that are seen as successful in our careers. And I think everyone here would agree with me and say that's completely untrue. There's so many different options, and even here on this panel, I think that's a small selection of different careers that everyone can go in for. And no matter what, you're sort of gaining these really amazing, very particular skills of what you're doing right now in your academic path as you're a student, that have fed into all these different career paths that you can see now. So it's a really important thing to think about, is you're all successful in all these really cool different careers, you know what I mean? So does anybody else want to weigh in on that question about sort of moving around and sort of the realities of that for you guys?
Sure, I can jump in quickly. I think, I mean, it is still the reality that mobility on a CV is seen as a positive thing. If somebody has changed institutions between PhD, master's, if they've had the experience of being in different labs, it's still seen as a positive thing. But I think more and more the awareness, the concept of mobility doesn't necessarily only have to be geographic mobility. It can be mobility within an institution. So maybe you worked in the Faculty of Biology and Earth Sciences at the same university. Or maybe you worked, you had internships in an industry related or an office, a regional office for geology or something in the same city, but in a different context. So now we talk more about mobility when we're evaluating a candidate. Did they have intellectual mobility? Did they have mobility in terms of developing new skills, of going outside the main topic of their research to date? So there's other concepts of mobility that aren't necessarily only geographic. Did this person move halfway across the world 3 times and that makes them resilient and super strong? Not everyone can do that. And why should we slam the door shut for these types of academic careers? All academic broadly, being university or publishing or museums, we shouldn't just slam the door shut for people who don't have the ability to move geographically for family reasons or health reasons or political reasons. So I think right now, of course, geographic mobility is an asset, but we are moving towards a concept of mobility, not just being geography, but being intellectual and basically any way a person pushed themselves outside of their comfort zone and learned something new and grew and developed as an academic or a researcher or someone interested in research. So I think that also I would put like a positive shine on that it's not 100% necessarily that you move to a new country in order to get a job, an academic job anymore. I wouldn't say it's necessary and the only way anymore. Yeah, exactly. And the point about remote working, exactly. That was just written in the chat there.
Yeah,
Jill.
absolutely so true. So Xiao wrote about remote working as well, like that's played a massive role, I think, since COVID as well. Richie, sorry, did you want to weigh in real quick there as well?
No.
Okay, sorry, just checking. I didn't want to leave you out. I think it's Alison touched on there, which is also really important, is the more we think about this idea of mobility and that idea changing of what that means. I think that's also plays a really important part about how we interact with EDI. I think that's what really helps us with EDI is how we look and view mobility. So it's something that should be sort of in the forefront of our minds when we're thinking about this. And if we're on review panels or hiring roles as well, that mobility can mean very different things to different people, especially in the EDI realm. So I think that's really, really nice to hear that you've already thought about this a lot, Alison, I know, but that the EDI is a part of that mobility and thinking about what adaptability looks like for individuals, I guess. So
it's so true. Yeah, this is it's everything. It's how we review grants. It's how we review people for jobs. It's not just like my thinking. This is the national thinking moving in that direction, and it's inspired by places like the UK and France. So I think it's like for the field broadly moving in the right direction for EDI.
Yeah, definitely. And for all of you here as well that are, we have at least 3 parents. I know that I'm keeping away from your children right now, so I'm so sorry. It's also really important for this, right? That mobility, and as you said, how about like working from home office, and feeding into work-life balance then as well. At the end of the day, I think everybody's ideas and maybe minds were a little bit opened to what work-life balance meant during COVID too. So it's sort of feeding all into that together. So I have one very positive question to end on before I let you all away with your evenings that I'm sure you're desperate to get to at this point. Is what do each of you find most rewarding about your positions? And if you have like sort of one main thing that you find sort of like, this is why I love my job, or maybe you don't, but I hope that you have one thing that you find rewarding about the roles that sort of motivates you within your own careers. So whoever wants to go first.
I mean, I'll just go ahead and say that I don't mean this in a cliche way. I never have 2 days that are just the same. And I feel very, very privileged in that way. It's never boring. I've been interested in fossils since I was little, and it's a dream come true, really, to be able to like just have all that just at your fingertips, and I'm just appreciate it all the time, really.
That's a great answer, especially if you're a kid that loves fossils. I can tell you, a curator role is the perfect role for you. How do you want to go next?
Sure. I mean, also echoing a bit what Richie said, like no day is the same, and in this case, it's being exposed to such different science, and you feeling that after the scientists themselves, you are one of the first ones to actually get to find about these findings, these results, whatever. So that's really interesting. And again, specifically for the journal I work for, it's such a varied thing. And one day I'm reading about cancer, the other day I'm reading about fossils, the other day I'm reading about song lyrics and how they progress through time. So yeah, variety, but also again, I appreciate the stability. Like it's 9 to 5, I close my laptop, that's done. I go on with my other aspects of my life that I enjoy.
I would agree with that also.
And then from me on my side, I get huge inspiration from seeing the team of early career researchers here in Lausanne that I work with. It's such a privilege to be able to help the growth, even a little bit, like supervising, helping someone along the way as they're learning how to do research. And for me, that's just a constant source of energy and inspiration, is being able to help in some small way the development of the career of young people. Now, I can say young people because I have lots of gray in my hair, so I think I'm the oldest on this panel. So it's whether it's teaching bachelor's or helping master's students, PhD students, postdocs, it's really yeah, the greatest part of my job is being able to contribute to that aspect of helping people learn and grow about our fabulous field of paleontology.
Thank you so much, Alison. And thank you again. I will leave it there. I'm so aware of how much time I've taken, but I will endeavor to try and put this webinar up on our YouTube channel as soon as I humanly can, because I've already got some notifications from people who've left and they already want to see the end of this and the questions. I think it's a pity I had so many questions for all of you as well that I was writing down and I didn't even get to them. So for those who are happy to share your details, yeah, it is the same. For those who are happy to share your details, you can find all 4 of our panelists very easily online with their details there. But of course, some of them have already shared that. So hopefully you've taken some photos as well if you reach out. I think all 4 of you, including Liz who's not here, just amazing role models within your own sort of career paths. And thank you so much for giving back and giving time to this as well, because it's sort of really nice to have honest conversations about sort of, you know, your own experiences going through this. And I really appreciate always sharing your massive amounts of failures and rejections and just normalizing that process that we're in sort of our academic environment. So with that, that concludes our webinar series for this half of the year. Unless you're on the peer review training program, we have 2 more sessions. So I noticed some names, don't forget about that. And we will have a new program coming in the second half of the year, and something similar to this happening at the annual meeting. So a bit of tantalizing information for you. And if you want to share this, please do, and become a member of PALAS, spread it to your friends as well. And with that, I will say a very good evening or good morning to you all, and see you next time. Thank you so much, guys. Take care.